My name's Tim, and I work with Mavi and the mission team here at the church. And this is our first ever meet and greet midweek missions forum that we've had in a long time. And so we're excited about this. And so you're part of history by being here. And next month, we have Covenant missionary Greg Faust from Germany. And he'll be here next month. And so we'll make sure we announce that in time. And we have a real treat tonight. We have somebody that grew up in Calaveras County, homegrown, and many of you know Phil Wykle. And so, Phil, come up and just let us know where you've been serving and what God's been doing.
All right. Yeah.
Give a welcome, everyone.
I was raised on the corner of Pope and Roberts, just right across. There wasn't any bridge then. We had to go around to come to church. And this building was the whole church. And Fred Bach and my folks were instrumental in moving this in here. And this was the first community covenant church where I went to Sunday school until I got a little star with a crown around it or something for never missing a Sunday school class. So anyway, then I moved away to Idaho and we bought a cattle ranch, and I was there for 37 years when my wife was killed in a four-wheeler rollover, and it just destroyed me. I couldn't even go back and sleep in the bedroom. I slept outside, and I had to get out of there. And I'd been doing short-term missions work, volunteered for this project or that project since the mid-'80s. And so I knew Nicaragua and El Salvador, and I decided to just get out and go for a walkabout. And I ended up in Nicaragua, and Cristo Vive was the name of our handicap camp that my wife started in Idaho, which was in conjunction with Johnny Erickson. She went to all of her camps and learned how to start one. But when I was out on a walkabout, I ran through this little town of Acoyapa, where there's more horses than there were pickup trucks. You know, they were tied out front, and there was oxen, and I said, hey, this looked like my kind of town. So I got a hold of a horse and went out in the countries and was just looking around, and I was about an hour or so out of town on horseback and run across the farm that said Cristo Vive on the gate. You know, that was the name of this farm. And I says, whoa, well, maybe it's just my imagination and maybe not. So I went in there and I got talking with the owner and sitting there on the feeder, and it was a farm that had about a dozen cows and horses and a caretaker, and he was wanting out of there because he didn't live there. He lived in town, and people would steal from him all the time. And so he was trying to talk me into buying it. And I said, no, I just lost my wife 3 months ago. I'm not supposed to do anything major. And but then he says, well, look, all I want to be a taxi driver. You buy me a late model car and pay for a taxi license, and I'll give you the farm for that. So I bought him a 2-year-old Toyota Corona and a taxi license, and I had a farm. and it didn't have a house on it, but it had a shack where there was a caretaker that had about 8 kids. And it was just all brush and not much for fences. And so I started building a place for myself and camping in a tent. And then I got a housekeeper to come in to cook and clean and just, you know, I didn't like living all by myself, and I liked to have somebody do my cooking. And she knew how to read and write, which almost all the people in the country didn't. And so I said, well, in the afternoon when it's hot and the housework's done, can you teach these kids of Erlocio, the worker there, had, out of the 8 kids, 6 of them were school age. And there's no school around. It's a couple-hour walk for the kids to go to school and 3 rivers across. And so I said, just teach them basic math so that they can count change and know what they're getting in change, and teach them how to write their name. And then I was telling her, and I had a list of things like the difference between gasoline and diesel. They only had to learn the D and the G because they didn't want to mix those, and the different chemicals that we use that they were in charge, or the dad was in charge of, and he couldn't read either. And within 3 days, that 8 kids was up to 17, or maybe 5 days, but it was that same week. They just kept coming in from over the hills. They said, we hear you got a teacher here. And so the gal that was working for me says, hey, wait a minute. I didn't sign up to be a teacher. I signed up to be a cook and a house cleaner. And I said, and she said, besides that, you can't do that. You're going to get in trouble. You can't just start a school in Nicaragua. You got to have it legal. And so I got on the horse and rode into town and talked to, and I found the principal of the school there was also the administrator. And I was telling him in my very poor Spanish at the time what was going on, and he just looked at me with the mouth hanging open. He says, you're kidding. He says, we've been wanting a school out there for a long time, but there's no funds for it, and it's too far out, and there's a minimum of 20 kids. But he says, if we'll supply all the textbooks and the little desk with a chair on them, for the school, and food for them to cook out there in the yard. The mothers take turns cooking them a hot lunch because they don't get breakfast, and they'll be able to graduate at sixth grade. It'll just be a 1 through 6. And so that was fine. And he says, but the only thing, we got to have a accredited teacher, and we don't have funds for that either. And I said, it's getting thicker now. I said, well, what's the accredited teacher going to cost? And he says, well, we can give you one that's in training and hasn't got accredited yet, but she's in training, and that'll count, and her salary plus insurance will be about $220 a month. And I says, well, I'll think about that. Well, I knew I'd do it. And so then I paid for the teacher for about 3 years, and finally the government just did it too. And then that was all on my front porch, just it was too much for me. All these kids right on the front porch screaming and running around and playing in the yard. And so I built a pole barn across the road about, 80, 90 yards away, where I could see what was going on, but didn't have to hear it all. And that then was the school. I loaned that to the government for the school for during the week, and then our church on the weekends. And I told him that the only reason I'd do that is because I wanted to teach a Bible class, and I wanted to do it myself. I didn't want the teacher doing it. And he says, well, I can't give you permission to do that, but nobody's ever going to know. Why don't you just do it? And if we're ever going to come out with an administrator, I'll let the teacher know so that you don't do it that day. And so that's the way it was the whole time. And that's been 14 years ago. We ended up with about 50 milk cows and a little country store and that church and the school and 3 houses, 2 for employees. And it was just a little community that popped up around the church and the school. And on Sundays, we'd have 30 or 40 people come, unless they knew we were going to have food afterwards, and then it'd be 80 or 90. So we'd pop a surprise dinner on them once in a while, but we didn't announce it anymore. And everything was, going pretty good until this was started in 2011 or 12. And 2018, there was a revolution in Nicaragua, and I had to leave, and I ended up marrying a girl from Nicaragua, and she's a Christian, and she did taught the Bible school from then on, but anyway, when all the shooting started, and it was kind of a civil uprising against the president, we got across the river to Costa Rica, and then we got kicked out of there for being illegally in the country and went to Panama and spent a year there. And that's why we've got a Panama pillow back here on the table. Then that quieted down, and everything was back to normal. And we started a church in town also that we call Cristo Vive, and it was just an old fallen down house, and we ripped all the interior walls out, which were not supporting anything. They were just paper or thin walls. And that church had, at one time, it had 45 kids and 15 adults, because they were the same pastor that preached for us preached there on a Saturday, and they were there all day with activities to get the kids off the streets on Saturdays. And it's still going. But then, because during this revolt in 2018, the local people tore up all the cobblestones and built a barricade and homemade cannons, and they stopped the traffic for 3 weeks on the International Pan-American Highway. You can imagine there was trucks with produce backed up for miles and miles with food rotting in them. But they wanted the president to leave, and he couldn't beat them because the military wouldn't shoot their own people. And so he finally got mercenaries from Cuba to come in, and they came in with tanks and big stuff. And of course, they put it down in no time, killing about 300 and some university students were primarily the things. But the Catholic Church was letting them hide out in the churches during the night, and during the day they were out behind their barricade. And the government stratified the churches. And afterwards, he was really down on the Catholic churches, and so he arrested or deported all the priests, and then he put in his own Latin-speaking propaganda machines that could do mass and then have 2 hours to talk the Sandinista agenda to them. And of course, they had to go to it. And that worked, and he just was getting more and more paranoid. And then when our government pulled Maduro out of Venezuela, that was his monetary support. Venezuela was supporting both Cuba and Nicaragua with oil and with money. And so that made him super paranoid. And then he decided he better get rid of all the evangelical, especially any of them that had any money or volunteers that were from the United States. And so they were the first to go, and then the missionaries. And of course, when he did that, he didn't put them in jail like he does the local priest, because they're Americans. He'd confiscate all their property. He'd trump them up for money laundering. Well, then he could confiscate all the property and ship them home, or ship them to somewhere in the United States. Didn't matter what plane was going. I was far enough out that I was biding my time, and we took the church sign down and just have the school sign up. And our pastor is no longer a pastor; he's a teacher, and so we're getting by with it. But I was a real danger for all the property to be confiscated. And one night, my brother-in-law just shows up, and he shows up in a rented car, because my car had my license plates on it, and he didn't want they could track that. And he said, grab your backpack. As soon as it's dark, we're leaving for the border. And it's kind of funny because the police there are all crawling over every 15 or 20 miles all day long, but at 5 o'clock they all go home. So during the night when all the crime goes, there's no police out. And anyway, so we took off at night and headed for the border with and that's why I don't have any slides. I left everything there. I just had my backpack and headed for the border, and then my brother-in-law had arranged for coyotes, is what we call them, that guide you across the illegal border. And we met with some coyotes and they were $20 a person for my wife and I. That's what. And the coyotes that bring people to the United States are 5,000 to 10,000 a person. Yeah, but that's how they rip off the people running of the United States. But anyway, we got up to where the river was, and it was been raining, and it was just flood stage. It was just no way you could get horses across it, because I was supposed to be met with horses, but they couldn't even get a raft across it. It was running flood stage. So they had a plan B, and they took us through the woods about a half a mile or so in the mud to get to where they had fell a tree right against the road. And this is the Pan American Highway, and it was just past the immigration office, and they chopped it and cut the limbs off so that you didn't see it. It just hit the bridge there below where the railing was, so you couldn't see it. And so we got to that, and we had 5 coyotes helping us, and they took our backpacks and says, climb up that tree, and then there's a guy on that water pipe that's hanging on a cable underneath the road that'll help you get over onto that pipe. And the pipe's about from here to the table. You could hang onto one guy's hand, and you could almost reach the other guy's wrist, and he'd get a hold of your wrist and swing you over onto that water pipe. And then it was like, I don't know, 40, 50 feet down to the river. And the pipe was not that hard to walk on because it was only about 5 feet off below the road on a cable, but you just couldn't look down. You just had to walk all the way across the river. And my wife did it too, and she's the city girl. It was really, really amazing. But she didn't have any way to go back. And so when we got across, the same thing. There was a guy there leaning way over and somebody hanging onto his belt to keep him as he was reaching under to grab our arm from the other guy and pull us up to the rail and flop us like flopping a big fish over into the boat onto the road. And they had a little tricycle taxi, there, and took off with us and the luggage to where there was a bus, and they didn't stop. I don't know how they got around the Honduras state immigration, but we didn't stop there anyway. Maybe we went over on that pipe. I don't know. But then we were on the bus and headed for all the way through Honduras to El Salvador. And Honduras is still just full of narcs, drug pandilla, and it's very it's much more dangerous than Nicaragua. Nicaragua has a bad government, but they don't have much crime because the government shoots them. And El Salvador was really controlled by the pandilla up until 5 years ago, and they got a new president, Bukele, that cleaned house. He got permission from the people for dictatorial powers for a year he replaced all the people in Congress and all the judges and put in his own people, and it's really peaceful there. And I visited it a couple of years ago and was quite impressed, so I thought we'd go to El Salvador, not stay in Honduras. But now we're on the bus with a passport that's never been stamped out of Nicaragua into Honduras or out of Honduras, you know. But I didn't want to be illegal there because I wanted to live there. So we go up there, and I show him give that guy at the immigration to El Salvador my passport, and he opens it up and he looks at it and he says, "Well, you never checked out of Honduras. Well, you never entered Honduras. Well, you never checked out of Nicaragua." And I looked right straight at him in the eye, and I just says, "That's the idea." And he says, "You know, we see that quite a bit. Let me take this in back and I'll fix it up." And he stamped me in. And then Carla, after and she didn't have to use her passport because they can go between all of Central America with just their ID, like our Social Security card. They have an ID. And it's and it's still in her maiden name, so that was better because it wasn't hooked to me. And her passport is. So then, after we got settled for a few days, then her brother-in-law paid the coyote, came up across that pipe illegally, spent a few days with us, and then went back with Carla across that pipe, and then went up to the road and climbed up the road to the immigration office, and then came back through legally. So she could go back and forth, but I can't because but I'm a refugee. But now I have a residency in El Salvador. And the farm, for the first year, all that just went terrible. The pastor quit coming out. The guy that was a good employee turned out to just be stealing me blind and not rotating the pastures. We have now 22 different pastures. We only run the cows on them for 3 or 4 days and then move them to another, and it takes over a month to come back again, so they all regrow. And he just run them on the closest one until he grubbed it into the ground and killed all the ground. And so it was awful. And so I didn't know what to do because that was the hub for the Cristo Vive work. And so we prayed a bunch about it. And just here 2 months ago, a man who's 40 years old, been working all his life on a farm with his parents, and he's married and has a couple of kids, and he really wanted to work on another ranch where they had their own house, and he actually got paid because he's been working for his dad, and you know how that goes. You get room and board, and once in a while there's some money. And so he is really, really good, and he's replanting everything, and now my mother-in-law found another pastor that's coming out and preaching on Sundays, and people really like him, and the thing's returning really good. And the new help, the new employees, they're not Christian, but they're not Catholic either. They just haven't been evangelized yet. But he says, yeah, when there's not a crisis on the farm, the whole family will come to church every Sunday. And so that's my report. And I guess I'm semi-retired now. I use the hammock in the afternoon. But I do work for the Bitcoin Center as a volunteer interpreter they have a lot of people that come from other countries to Berlin, which is the name of the town, same as Germany, Berlin. And because you can live on Bitcoin there. All of the businesses use Bitcoin or dollars. You have a choice. And so, and then I teach English class once a week there too. So it gives me something to do. And we found a little church that is that the pastor puts all the songs up there on the board so that I can sing them if I can see the words in Spanish, and then he prints his sermon in both languages and gives me a copy so I can follow his sermons because I couldn't follow the sermons. I get lost if I, and so that's really nice. And then Carla has a bunch of friends there, and she can go home and visit her mother when I come up here. So, works out.
Bill, do you stand out as an American? I mean, does everyone know who you are? Are you an easy target?
Well, not where I was. Yeah, there's people that in Acuyapa, the whole time I was there, I never met an English-speaking native, and there weren't any tourists either. So I met one tourist the whole time I was there. But in El Salvador, there's a lot of people coming and going because when they come to El Salvador from Germany or Argentina or wherever, United States, Canada, to learn about the Bitcoin community, they speak all different languages, and so the people are, I stand out, but I wouldn't say I'm a target. It's if I'm going to buy something that's more than $100, I send my wife to do it because there is a gringo price and a Latino price, but that's about the only target I am.
Your farm in Nicaragua, did you just lost?
No, I got it all transferred over into my wife's maiden name before, and I had done that a year before. I could kind of see the handwriting on the wall, and I had done that before my brother-in-law says, somebody in the government told somebody in the government that sold somebody that he knows that I was under investigation, and it was just a matter of days before the police were out to my farm. And when they come out, they don't say anything. They don't tell anybody where you're going, what you did. They just put the handcuffs on, put you in the back of the truck with about 4 guys with rifles and take you into the prison, and then that's when they trump you up for money laundering. And then if they want you to admit it, they torture you until you do. But it's not even necessary because just like in this country, if you get arrested for money laundering, the government can confiscate your stuff before they even try you. That's true in this country too. And that's what they do down there. They just confiscate all the property, and then they say, well, do you want to stay in prison, or are you going to buy a ticket out of here? And so, if I had stayed there and got investigated, they would have confiscated all that property. But this way, it's probably not going to get confiscated because I'm gone, and it's not my name, and the church sign's gone. So.
El Salvador, have you found new needs, new ways to serve? That's basically, you're part of a church there.
Yeah, we're part of a church, and we're involved with it, but not in the capacity that, we're still pretty newcomers. And it's a very Catholic community, then so there are a lot of good people, but it takes a lot to convert a Catholic because it's such a family tie there that they won't leave it even if they don't believe it.
Are there schools for the kids, or like you?
Yeah. Well, no. My stepson Ruland's 22 years old, and he's been in the United States for 4 years, and painting houses. And he went across illegally. It took him 22 days to get up to the United States, and then waited there at the border for 4 days in the brush before the paid-off immigration guy showed up, and then they took him across the river and high-speeded him through all the bureaucracy. The Coyote had one immigration officer that is paid off, and every Coyote has one. That's part of your pay. But anyway, he's there, and of course, I talked him into taking the voluntary exportation because it was just a matter of time before he got caught by ICE and went out the hard way. And so he did that. And so we got to help him increase his faith. He's believes in God and Jesus because he was taught that, but he's still in the teenage mentality and doesn't want to live it yet. So I'm working with him. And my daughter is too young, and I can't get her in till she's 18 because both parents have to sign her off because of child trafficking and all these things. One parent can't take a kid out. They got to go together because they so many times if there's a couple that doesn't get along, one of them will take off with the kids, and so she's living with, but she's doing really, really well. She's in a Christian school, and she's valedictorian and lives with her grandma. And when she turns 18, she'll come up and then go to university up in El Salvador.
How did you find home and lodging and such? You're coming over with nothing.
Yeah, well, fortunately, I had some Bitcoin, and Bitcoin's easy because it's digital, and so you didn't have to have I lost my bank account. There was only about $500 in it, but the government got that, and of course you couldn't carry a whole bunch of money. But the Bitcoin it's on your wallet on your phone, and you pay with a QR code. You go up to the counter and just flip it across there. You type in there what you bought, and they get a receipt on their phone, and it's faster than paying with cash. And so anyway, we had money that we rented a house, and it was a nice 2-bedroom, 2-bath house that it's kind of rustic. You still used cold water in a barrel to bathe with, but you don't need hot water down there. It's always nice. But it was only $300 a month. That's about what they run. But it was owned by a El Salvadorian that was illegal in the United States. And there's about 200 or 300 of them in Berlin that are illegal in the United States that own houses that they rent them out. And if they get exported, they'll want their house back and there won't be anything to rent. So I got thinking, if I'm going to stay here, we better get a house. And so we ended up buying a house that had been empty for 40 years that we could buy really reasonable and do the sweat equity to get it remodeled so it was nice. And so we worked on it while we still had the other one rented, but now we have our own place.
Make a movie of this stuff, huh? It's unbelievable.
Well, there's no doubt about it that I've seen more miracles in the last 14 years than the rest of my life that I was aware of. I'm sure I had lots of miracles, but now I'm aware of them when they happen. And I wake up in the morning and says, "Good morning, Lord. I'm looking forward to what miracle you're going to send in my life today." Yeah. And the coincidences are false news. Everything's planned out.
Well, does anyone have any last questions? We're going to ask how we can pray for Phil and his ministry and just gather around him. But does anyone have any other questions as far as? Did you think you were going to be a missionary? Weren't you a rancher?
Yeah, I was cattle rancher for 37 years, but I've been going on short-term missions every January since '84. And so, and it might be cleaning up after a hurricane, it might be with New Tribes Missions, or it might be with Red Cross. And when you work for free, you're never unemployed. And so after I'd had a few of these mission trips under my belt, I could go back without the mission and just go to work. We had a dairy goat project that Samaritan's Purse paid for, and I was running around buying dairy goats that were lactating, and that we set it up like heifer projects so that the people would get a goat, but it wasn't theirs until they gave the first female kid to somebody that I chose, and the second female kid to somebody they chose that helped them, and then it was their goat. But it wasn't their goat, and so we had about 18 goats, and then one of the houses had the billy goat, and none of them had pastures because they'd been wiped out with a hurricane, and they were all in shacks that we were building over 7 years there, and but they would take turns sending a couple of boys up to the volcanoes for pasture, and nobody owned that because it was a live volcano, but it wasn't erupting, and so it was free pasture. They'd go up and spend the day with the goats, and then bring them home to each house at night for milking. And that.
Yeah, we can. How are ways that we can pray for you, and what are your financial needs right now?
Well, actually, I'm all right financially, and I praise God for that. But I would ask to have a work in El Salvador, and I'm thinking of starting a men's Bible study. There we have a place that's kind of a hangout for all the expats and everything. It's about a half an acre and got a big barbecue and a swimming pool and stuff. So people hang out there quite a bit. And a couple of them went to church with me once or twice, but they didn't understand anything, so they didn't go. And I have a book that I really like that I made a bunch of copies of. It says "Who Was Jesus?" and it's perfect for witnessing to Catholics or people that think that, yeah, Jesus lived, but I don't know about this divinity thing or virgin birth or something, And so this book is good. And I made when I was in Idaho, I made a bunch of copies of it so that I could use it and so we could pray for that Bible study or whatever else. God doesn't ever tell me ahead of time what He's planning. It's just all of a sudden shows up, and you just gotta say, "Oh, that's my door," And so pray for my door and my wife, and my family.
What's your wife's first name?
Carlita or Carla. Carla with a K, and my daughter is Naomi, and it's Naomi Verna Wykle. My mother's name was Verna, and so she's got, and Naomi was her other grandmother, so she's got both grandmothers' names. Okay.
You guys listening to those prayer requests? Okay, so let's stand up, and Phil, maybe you can just take a step down, just
Right.
around you. I don't know how we're going to do this with the tech.
Yeah. Yeah, I got to get rid of that mic.
We'll just lay it right here. Good. And put a hand on them, or put a hand on a neighbor's shoulder,
Yeah,
or
I can take my hat off during the prayer time.
That's it. So we have Phil's family, a ministry, a door to open. Okay. So let's pray, and maybe, Mavi, when you say amen, you could pray more than once, but when you say amen, our prayer's done. Okay?
Yes.
So God, we thank you for bringing Phil to us, and just how you guided and protected and just have led his life in Nicaragua and El Salvador. Just bless him, protect him. do. I pray for this door of ministry. I know, especially when you mention men, there's just always a need, no matter where you go, to reach out to men, just to call men to be your disciples.
God, we thank you so much for the miracles that you show to us each day, that you perform in our lives and we don't pay attention to them often. And just thank you that Phil is really noticing how you are filling his needs and putting positions in front of him, things that he hasn't even expected. And we just pray that you give him the guidance and the wisdom and the freedom to be able to enjoy what it is that you place before him, and that you will guide him and to give his heart to you